Hello and welcome to our podcast on efficient HR, effective teams, simplifying admin for manufacturing leaders. My name is Jennifer Libby, and I'm fortunate to be a district manager for Insperity. Today, we're going to talk about a number of things that will hopefully let you focus on why you got into business and why you love manufacturing. First of all, we're going to talk about HR compliance essentials, setting clear handbook expectations, simplifying time and attendance tracking, managing leaves of absence and employee well-being, which we know is very tricky, leadership development, and then finally succession planning. In addition, we were going to have a number of opportunities for you to be engaged. So please take part in the polls, enter suggestions in the chat, and make sure that you interact with us and give us your thoughts so we can take the direction of the conversation that way. It's my pleasure to welcome our presenter today, and her name is Marla Markoff. Marla has over 20 years of experience in learning and development with organizations. She brings a wealth of knowledge from corporate, government, and consultative backgrounds. Marla has contributed to various industries, including nonprofits, the federal government, newspaper associations, and an international intellectual property organization. Marla holds a BA in psychology from the University of Maryland and a Master of Science in Industrial Organizational Psychology from the University of Baltimore. She has dedicated her career literally to collaborating with business leaders, employees, and all stakeholders. And for the past 11 years, she has been a key member here at Insperity, and she currently leads the Washington, D.C. service team. Before her leadership roles, she served in a variety of organizational roles at Insperity, and in her free time, Marla enjoys spending time with her husband, son, daughter, and extended family. She's passionate about new recipes, technology gadgets, watching television shows, and catching up on her reading list. So again, it is our honor and my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Marla Markoff.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm so happy to be here today. Compliance is definitely one of those things that are so important in a business and can easily be overlooked. It's really important to make sure that you're aware of what's going on with compliance, because it can be super confusing, especially where you should start, what resources you should use, and what resources you should trust. First, we're going to start off talking about HR compliance essentials. We're going to talk about the foundation. The best way to start looking at compliance, is really to stay current on all the relevant HR regulations and practices. Again, where do you start? These are the main topics and places that we recommend you start: payroll, overtime, and workplace safety. And these are the main areas, if you focus on them, that can minimize your risk overall in your business. So here are a few tips for staying compliant. If you do periodic reviews, you can really catch potential compliance issues early. And that's really the main point here, is staying ahead to avoid any types of penalties. It's really important to stay up to date with geographic mandates that might come out. Sometimes they can come out quickly, and you don't want to be surprised by those. Sometimes that can be where your physical business is located, along with potential laws that may impact how you do business. Having reliable resources that alert you about these updates and changes can keep you ahead of changes to avoid penalties, fees, and possible other challenges. If you think about like your car, you want it to run smoothly and you want to know if you need to have any recalls on anything that's happening to your car. Same thing with your business, right? If anything needs to be looked at or changed with your processes, with the way that your employees are accruing PTO or sick leave or anything like that, you want to be alerted. So you really need to make sure that you have the right resources and valid places that are alerting you to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your business and for your people. Jennifer, is there anything that you'd like to add about these tips that we're sharing?
Thanks, Marla. You must have read my mind because as you were going over those reminders to stay compliant, it reminded me about the just explosion we've seen in the number of mandates that manufacturers are expected to be in compliance. I graduated from college in 1993, and there were, if you picture a bar graph, about this many. And now, fast forward to 2025, we've got about this many. And so keeping up with that is an incredible challenge for our manufacturers.
Absolutely. So making sure that you have a scheduled review, that you're checking in, whether that's monthly, quarterly, whether that's, on your calendar or you have, a specific alert, like I mentioned before. It's really, really important that you're making those periodic audits of your compliance and your documentation to make sure that you haven't missed any important requirements for your business. Now I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer for our first poll.
Thanks, Marla. Really looking forward to hearing from our participants now. So please take a moment and enter your feedback into the chat. The question is, what compliance area poses the biggest challenge for your particular team? Is it A, payroll, B, overtime, or C, safety? Please take a few minutes now and just pop that into the response.
Great. Thanks for those answers. Now we're moving along to what I think of as really the foundation of HR compliance for businesses, the handbook. Now, a lot of times when I speak with business owners about the handbook, I get a lot of big sighs and it's a lot of work. Well, it can be. However, setting clear expectations and having a handbook that really lays out clear policies for your employees, for your leadership, it's really the best way to have everything set out in black and white for everybody to understand and to provide consistency across your organization. This is how we lay out clear policies, job expectations, and everyone across the whole entire organization from top to bottom, from bottom to top, are all seeing the same policies. This can be looked at as an extension of a company's culture, of leadership's vision, and also as really the foundation of what an organization stands for. Just by looking at a handbook, we can see what is expected of employees and what a code of conduct looks like, and also all the policies that employees are expected to adhere to throughout the whole entire organizational chart.
And Marla, that's such a great point in terms of just being able to look in one spot and see that compliance that we talked about before. As I mentioned, it can be extremely overwhelming, but there is help and there is hope. Insperity can help with that. I was a director of HR in manufacturing for over 20 years, and I wish I had Insperity to keep me current with that. So that's a great point. Audience, we're looking to you now for some more input. Please put this in the attendee chat. How often do you update your employee handbook? Again, it's a huge task, right? Do you do that annually, which is, I think, often recommended? Do you do that every 2 to 3 years? C, only when regulations change? D, unsure, never updated. And again, remember, this is a safe place. It's okay to say that. And then E, maybe you don't have one at this point. So please take a few minutes and enter that in the chat.
Great, thanks for all those answers, and we hope you were honest. No one needs to be shy. So here are some best practices. Like Jennifer said, we do handbooks daily, if not multiple times a day for our clients. And some of the best practices that we recommend is to review handbooks about every 2 years or so, or really once new legislations come out or laws that are passed, which we've seen a lot of them coming up quite frequently lately in specific states and specific areas, down to even county specific laws that have been being passed. So it's helpful to have wording that's succinct and clear if you think about it, when an employee has a question, they're going to go to their manager, and a manager most likely is going to go to the handbook. Maybe they'll go to an HR person. A lot of times with us, they come to their HR team at Insperity and they say, what is the policy? And we'll say, let's check your handbook, right? Because that's where the policy is, and that's where we expect everybody to go, because again, it's that consistency across the board. And so the handbook really provides that expectation for everybody. Again, no matter where you are in the company, everybody understands what your PTO policy is, which we'll get to in a little bit, or what days off do we have for the holidays? What do we do for this specific situation? And the handbook will really lay out all of that. So that's why for the best practices, we really want to make sure that everybody's aware of the policies and they're able to read them, that they're clear, and that also when you're rolling out new policies, they should be transparent, along with sharing any messaging from leadership that is really clear as to why. These are the expectations that we have for these new processes, and a lot of communication that goes along with that.
Marla, one thing that's really unique to our group right now that we're focusing on manufacturing is that multi-shift communication. So really that this handbook becomes extremely important, even more so when you've got those leaders at night, or those employees at night, or in that off shift, trying to get that clarity of communication. So I really feel that in situations with multi-shift, this is even more critical.
Absolutely, especially if you have supervisors who are overseeing different shifts, different times of day. There might be some overlap, there might be together certain times, but they're all looking at those same policies and they're all following those same sets of guidelines so that they're all practicing the same things. And we're going to talk about leadership development also in a little bit, but everything is then focused on what the culture of the organization is, which is then fed into that handbook. So everything is really being sustained through the policies, and everybody knows where to look. So it doesn't matter which shift you're on, right? Or whether or not you're having a conversation, because the policy is the policy. So hopefully that consistency really helps for that fairness and equality for employees to see that, they're all being treated the same. Mm-hmm. So that leads us to our next topic. We talked a little bit about PTO, and that has been in the HR world a really big topic under when I talked about even down to the county level of time and attendance. And those are big conversations that we have with our clients who have employees, whether they're in the same location, whether in multiple locations, because you might have employees in different locations that have different requirements for tracking time and attendance. So here are definitely just some of the many challenges that we see our clients face for time and attendance challenges. So inconsistent tracking, poor communication, manual systems, and then also non-compliance. Time and attendance tracking has come a long, long way, definitely. However, there's still many challenges that occur. Some are due to a lack of consistent policies. Some are even due to the inconsistent tracking or the way that time's tracked. Some know about what laws are in place and, some don't. And especially because there are some specific laws due to whether part-time, non-part-time, or maybe even for locations or situations.
That point on communication, Marla, is so critical. I think many of us are familiar with a Gallup poll a number of years ago that said, if you think people know what you've communicated, tell them 10 more times. And that might be excessive, but I think there are a lot of assumptions made and a lot of things. We know it, we've communicated it, But again, maybe they didn't read one email, different things like that. So again, especially when you're talking about timing and when people need to be at work and what has changed, that can't be overstated.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important too to have those PTO policies clearly written and to have leadership to understand what those PTO policies are and have them in your handbook in a place where they're easily accessible, whether that's in a printed version, in a hard copy, whether that's posted somewhere, whether it's in a break room, whether it's where a time punch clock is, whether it's where a beacon is, where it's somewhere where people can have access to it. Maybe it's somewhere that they can access it on their phone, on their mobile phone, on an app or something like that, so that everybody has access to it, so that they can check it, so that they can say, oh, I'm accruing. Am I accruing the right way? Or if it's on their paycheck stub and they're looking to see their accrual rates, if they can calculate that. So everybody should be able to have access to that policy so that they can calculate and make sure that they understand it. So some best practices for establishing clear and equitable PTO policies. I have to say, this is something that I have been in a lot of conversations with a lot of clients about PTO policies, and I think they should come up with master's degrees in PTO policies these days, with front loading and accruals and rollovers and all this blackout periods and payout options, and it's a lot. And I think having that mentality of putting our people first, and then we also have to be very fiscally responsible for the company, and how do we want to do this for our people? I just had a conversation the other day with a friend about unlimited PTO and how do I handle that, and what's the responsibility then for leadership about them approving PTO, and what does that look like, and how lenient should they be about approving PTO? And again, we talked about, having people on different shifts and making sure that there's coverage and making sure that there are enough people to get the work done that needs to be done. And if you need enough bodies to be doing work and more people, what happens around the holidays when everybody wants to take off? And how do you do that in an equitable way? And, there's a lot that has to happen with PTO and approval and all those things. And so, it's really important to have a system and to have these policies in place. So that's my first recommendation, is to having a solid policy. Know your PTO policy, know where to find it, or know how to look it up. I don't memorize ours. I've been with Insperity for coming up on 12 years. I still go into our employee handbook and I look it up. So I make sure that I know, what exactly it is, so that I can make sure I tell my team the right thing. Have a valid resource that can alert you when new information comes up. It is so important to be up to date with PTO laws, anything that has to do with time tracking and attendance. Have a solid resource that you can go to with questions about accrual rates. If you don't speak PTO language, find a resource that does. Make sure that you have a reliable resource that you can lean on, that you can ask questions to. Do you know about lunch breaks and what the laws are about who needs to take lunch breaks, and what does that look like about punching out and punching in, hourly punches, state and federal laws that focus on time and attendance, what all the things that are necessary, and by state, by county, all of those things. It's so important that when you focus on your business and you're a subject matter expert in your specific area of your business, if this isn't PTO policies, aren't your subject matter expertise, find a resource that is. And that's what we do pride ourselves on, is that we are. And so that's what we help our clients on, so that they can focus on their business and take this off their plate. So it's just really important that you have a go-to to be able to ask those questions too.
Marla, one of the things, and I'm based in Minnesota, and one of the things that our businesses have been dealing with this year is the new sick and safe leave. And that ties in really closely to the PTO policies, and again can be really overwhelming. And again, that is something that Insperity can help with clarifying. Our mission is to help all businesses succeed so communities prosper. And it doesn't just say if you're an Insperity client. So we are a resource whether you're a client or not. And again, that those, to your point, those state-specific laws, those county-specific laws can really add a layer of complexity that's incredibly challenging, but there is help.
And I have to say, just going online and researching online, the validity there, we don't always know if it's, up to date, if it's, the best information out there. That's why I say having a solid, reliable resource that that it's up to date and it's the right information, so that down the line, if you have an employee who thinks that it's not accurate, can't come back and say that they, weren't being, provided with the right information from the business or treated, how they were supposed to be treated. So another part of leave and time and attendance also is managing leaves of absence and employee well-being. And this is a tricky one too. Being in the HR field for over 20 years, I have to say this is another one of those areas that if you don't speak leaves of absence and you don't really know all of the complexity behind it, it can be very confusing. And I speak with business owners and entrepreneurs and folks who have owned their businesses for many, many years. And again, it's not their expertise, and it can be very complex on what am I supposed to be doing and how do I protect myself and how do I do what's best for my employees to make sure that they're, doing what they need to do to get better, to protect themselves, to be safe. So strategies for effectively managing leaves of absences. So what goes hand in hand with time and attendance? This is what, exactly the next step. So one thing that is really, really important about leaves of absences is documentation. I think that's really probably a word that we use in HR daily, by the minute, by the hour. Document, document, document. It is always so, so important that when someone's going out on a leave of absence, that you have documentation, whether they're going out for whatever reason, that you have that information from them, whether it's from their doctor as to why they're going out on a medical leave, that they're sharing that information as to this is why they're going out. We have very specific checklists that we require that our clients provide for us, and that we lead our clients through very specific checklists to make sure that they're following rules and also protecting themselves from HIPAA. We don't want them to know too much information about what kinds of medical procedures and those types of things. But if their employees cannot perform their job due to whatever reasons and they need to go out, then we just need a doctor letting us know those types of things. Medical leave can be one type of leave. It can be personal leave. It can be a military leave. It doesn't always have to be a medical leave. It can be lots of different types of leaves of absences, but I know a lot of times our minds go directly towards medical leave, but that's not the only types of leaves of absences, right? So the first thing is, again, documentation. The second thing that I think is super important is to be really consistent, right? We don't want to treat one employee one way when they go out on a leave of absence, but not somebody else. So we want to have policies in place as to how we're treating our leaves of absence, and that we are making sure that everybody is being treated the same way. So we're going to make sure that our leadership, our managers, that they all are fully understanding what our process is. Also that they can answer questions. Also that they're keeping records, right, of requests, and that they're all staying up to date on the Family Medical Leave Act, for example. Do we also know if, our company is eligible for family medical leave, and all of the criteria that goes into that? What does that mean for your company? And is that is something that even applies to you. Also, are there state resources that are available specifically for the location where you are and for your employee, depending on what kind of leave that they're going out on? Also, we're talking a lot about the employee, right? And that they're going out on leave. So that's outside of the organization, but also what's going on inside the organization. So you have all the employees who are here. And if you're missing one person, then there are all these other people who are now having to take over the duties of the person who's now out. So there's coverage needed as well. So there's also some strategies that need to happen on that side. So there's definitely a lot going on with leaves of absences and different things that need to happen from leadership, but also sometimes there's some morale that needs to make sure that we're keeping up with and making sure that everybody's who's working and still here when someone's out, to make sure that we're making sure that those employees are doing okay.
Marla, that's such an excellent point. I think the other thing that can be really overwhelming sometimes is what can I say and what can't I say, right? And that's, again, especially when we're in small organizations, sometimes the tendency is to share. And we just want to be delicate. And again, conversely, if there's more that we could be saying to deal with kind of the workload frustrations, then let's share that. So great point on that.
I think, Jennifer, you bring up a great point about what we can say and what we shouldn't be saying. And when someone's out on a leave of absence, I know a lot of times there's a lot of talk around the water cooler about, oh, how's so-and-so doing? Are they sick? Or is it this? Is it their family member? Is it, and it's really important that if we have certain privileged information, that we keep it that way, and that we're not sharing information that we shouldn't be sharing. Even though most of my clients that I work with are very small, tight-knit companies that a lot of them are family owned, and even though we're close, and keeping that information where it's supposed to be kept, especially when you're a leader and you have someone who reports up to you, it's important to keep that information private. Maybe you saw something on a medical documentation that maybe they sent to you by accident and you shouldn't have seen. It's important, to not ask, oh, are you having surgery? It's better to say, if you're not able to do your job and you need to go out, this is the type of documentation that I need. It's best to focus on if the employee is able to do their job or not able to do their job, versus, oh, well, is it because your back hurts you, or some specific reason, or asking a question directly as opposed to focusing on them not being able to do the job. So here's some other best practices that we have listed here. I think this one listed here is staying in touch with the employee who's out on leave, seeing when they're coming back. Sometimes, unfortunately, employees don't end up coming back. They make plans to maybe go on long-term disability if they have that, or they decide that it's not the best fit for them anymore. Maybe the job is too strenuous, and based on the reason they went out, whatever reasons, and then moving forward on what that looks like for next steps for the company and for the employee. So this next topic is near and dear to my heart. Leadership development is one of my favorite topics. And the reason why we have leadership development on here is because it's definitely one of those topics that is sometimes it's well thought of, and a lot of companies would like to do it, but at the same time, it takes a lot of set aside time, right? We have to hit pause for leadership development because our leaders are the ones who are moving and shaking, getting things done. And for leadership development to happen, we got to pull them out of what they're doing, and we got to let them take some time for themselves to have that development. And so leadership development is a great time to really take a look at who you have leading your people and getting them on the same page, but also sharing their strengths. One of my favorite thing about leadership development is hearing all of the stories and sharing of the strengths that different leaders have, and just them having that opportunity to get together. Because if you think about it, a lot of times they're all doing their own things, but when leadership development, when they're able to get together, it's just this great sharing of information and knowledge where they become their own resources. And they're able to learn from each other a lot of times, more so than the facilitator in the room or the online course or anything like that, because they're having an opportunity to share with each other. So I think sometimes even just, some time together to pull leaders and having them in one room can be a great moment just for the company to have that time together.
One of my favorite quotes, and I want to give credit to someone, but I don't remember who said it, Marla, but they said, what if we train them and they leave? And they said, worse yet, what if we don't and they stay? And I think that really throws into sharp relief. Are we investing in people, in terms of just pure turnover costs? A little training and investment can go a long way in saying to someone, I see something in you that maybe you don't even see in yourself yet, but I'm willing to invest in that.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I agree with that. And, the Gallup poll has shifted a little bit in the past few years, but previously it used to show that the main reason that people left their organization was because of their direct manager. That it used to be. It's shifted a bit, but I do believe that people stay because they feel like their manager respects them, has good communication skills, sets clear expectations, all of those great things. And when you have a direct supervisor, a leader, a manager, I like to use the word leader because I think a leader and a manager is two very different things. They know how to motivate you. They know how to get the best out of you, really. If you mess up and you make a mistake, they know how to turn that around into a lesson learned and how to shift it into, okay, how do we do that better next time, right? I mean, if it's something that's a fireable offense, that's a different story, right? And if it's, a different avenue, then we take that different avenue. But for those leaders that know how to set expectations and motivate people and grow them, and I think every leader's goal should be to develop people and get them to a place where they're moving past them in the career path. I think that should be every leader's goal, is to get their people to be developed and moving on to bigger and better things, because it's really important for a company to prepare those leaders and to develop them for the future, get that bench strength going, for the next line of, whether it's vice presidents or directors or whatever, because, as people move onward, if they are moving to somewhere else, right, who are we going to have to take that person's place? So it's really important to have that communication, emotional intelligence, and having that team, really solid, so that they're working smarter, not working harder.
And especially where we have people in these environments, again, multi-shift perhaps, or more geographically spread out, wearing multiple hats. Again, when we're in those small to medium-sized situations, there's not time sometimes to look at a handbook or to call someone or to get best practices. It's you're there and you're somebody needs an answer, or you're faced with a situation that you want to have, just to use the phrase, tools in your toolkit to address. And so again, I share your passion for this. And yes, it's hard to take people away from their duties, but again, just limiting one critical role from being turned over again. So important.
So a lot of times too, we have individual contributors who have the potential to be leaders, but we're not really sure, do they want to be a leader, right? But we want to promote them. And a lot of times our individual contributors want to be promoted. They want to make more money. If you go from, someone who's at this level and then they go up to the next tier, whether they're a manager or a supervisor or a director, you get to make more money. Maybe you get more benefits, or maybe you get, better hours, whatever that looks like. If you perform and you perform, you're a higher performer, then maybe, you get promoted. It's really important, though, to have conversations about, what are your goals? Do you want to manage other people? Is that something that you want to do? So, looking at your workforce and identifying, well, who is delivering consistent results? Who's taking initiative? And doing all this, we really recommend having, a streamlined performance management system with some metrics in place. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but again, there's that equality, that equity, that fairness across the board, consistency, say that word a lot, documentation, knew that word was coming up, right? To be able to identify these folks. And it's going to help you again with promotions and, if you have bonus payouts, things like that, right? And that's all going to align with, who are we going to look at for the next leaders, right? And then that's also going to lead us to our next topic, which is our succession planning. It all fits very nicely in. But, when we're taking a look at our high potentials, this is really important as to really just seeing those career paths. And I think our newer generations too, coming into the workforce, that is something that they're really looking for, is how do I progress in my career, and how do I grow and move forward from when I start day one in a company, and how do I keep moving forward? And that rolls right into preparing them, right? So different opportunities. And this doesn't necessarily have to cost money and sending them out, to a training program. This could be something internally. It could be mentorship programs, cross training, interim leadership roles where they're trying something out. It could be leading an internal project. Or we talked about handbooks initially. Do you have any type of policy for continued education reimbursement? Can they go and take some type of certification where they're learning some new type of trade or skill or something like that outside, so that they're still growing and developing, and they can bring that back in and maybe possibly mentor others and teach them how to use that. So again, it's continuing to build that all those tools, Jennifer, like you mentioned earlier, so that they are continuing to grow and possibly be that head of everybody else, possibly the next CEO, who knows, down the road. Those that are hungry to continue to, not just sitting still and growing their skills day after day.
And one thing that you keep talking about, and I keep talking about, I think your word for the podcast is probably documentation, right? And mine is communication. Communicating with people. Part of our goal of these podcasts is sharing what works, and sometimes that's what doesn't work. I was at a company early in my career, and we had identified someone to move into a management role. And he came to us and he said he was leaving to take a management position. And we said, no, you're our next manager. And he said, you never told me. So we had been having all these conversations and talking about how high potential he was and all these different things, but we hadn't shared that with him. And that seems in the cold light of day very obvious now, but sometimes we worry about, oh, they're going to feel we promised it to them, or oh, what if it doesn't happen? But again, I think that open communication and that sharing or sending them to a mentoring program so they know they're being looked at are just really key components of that. So thank you for indulging my point about communication again. Now we're looking for more participation from your audience and our viewers. We'd love to hear from you in the chat. And please tell us, what steps have you taken to identify those high potential employees for leadership roles? Whether to Marla's point, it's formal or informal, please take a few minutes and share with us again in the chat things that you've done to identify those people.
Oh, I've got a lot of great answers coming in the chat. Great. Give it another few seconds. So this leads us right into our succession planning, and succession planning can be a bit tricky. I've had a lot of conversations with smaller organizations about succession planning, and actually did a really, really neat webinar with about succession planning with family-owned organizations, which was super, super cool. You have kind of the two branches. You have the generational family-owned companies that the next generation wants to take on the organization. You have the next generation that's like, no thanks. And then they need to figure out, who's going to be taking on the company. So, with that said, no matter if it's family owned or not, it's really important to figure out, who the high potentials are. Also, who is, a high performer. So you have your potential versus your high performer, and taking a look at that matrix of, who has the possibility of taking over and what's the gap there between those two, so that we know what do we have to do training wise to fill in, and what is that going to look like? Is that one person? Is that two people? And how do we develop those people so that they can move from where they are now to, if someone's retiring, if someone is deciding to, move to, it's usually retiring or, moving on to something else. So just a couple ideas here of developing a succession plan and what that involves. Cross training too, essential. Again, just some ideas of what it's going to take to get that person ready to get to the next level, to make sure that they're ready to fill those big shoes when someone leaves. It might not be, again, someone that's even internal. Sometimes people even think of looking external, but you want to oftentimes hire those who are inside and grow internally to bring them up to the level of a C-level or the ownership level to lead the whole entire company. So this cross-training piece is really important so that they understand more of the business. So that brings us to the end of our session. Here's just a summary of what we've talked about today. So first of all, just doing an ongoing compliance check to make sure that you're minimizing the risk, helping your business stay on the right side of labor regulations, making sure that you just have some sort of check and balance for yourself and maybe an alert through a resource that you have. That handbook, I talked about documentation, very important that you have that. It's essential to communicate your policies. Strategies for managing your shift work, shift swaps, compliance requirements, those PTO policies, to keep your HR in alignment with labor laws. Documenting performance and using targeted coaching can build a stronger, more resilient team. Proactively planning for workforce needs, including leaves and future leadership roles, supports continuity and resilience. Now we're going to move on to see if anybody has any questions. Please feel free to type them in the chat.
Thank you, Marla. I think I froze there for a minute. Appreciate you engaging our audience again in that. Very excited to answer some of the questions that we've seen in the chat so far. One of the questions that I think is, really at top of mind is how can HR outsourcing help reduce the time spent on those routine administrative tasks like payroll processing and compliance reporting?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I find that the biggest reduction in time is really the research part of things. And we talked a lot about having that valid resource. And I think that's a lot of the time reduction and having a go-to person. We say to our clients a lot of the time, before you spend 5-10 minutes searching something online or taking really any amount of time thinking about something or wondering, is to pick up the phone and give us a call or send us an email. And so that's how I think we really reduce the amount of administrative burden, is that we have so much experience in specific industries because we have a lot of clients who are doing similar things, but also trends happen across the board no matter what the industry, right? And so because of that, we can give recommendations and then also share, like when we talked about the time and attendance, what's happening, what's going on, and provide that information so quickly that our clients don't have to take that time. And sometimes that can be hours, if not days, trying to figure out what are those laws and legislations and are they valid? And does that apply to me? And what does this even mean? Because you have to go through all the wording and all that. So I think those things and peace of mind, just being able to sleep at night to make sure that you're doing the right thing. All of those things, I think, bundled up together really saves a lot of time and peace of mind.
Marla, your point about earlier about, going to research it and the potential validity online, certainly that's one question. Another question is the specificity and that complexity, right? What state am I in? I'm in multi-states. Where are we at in the integration of that? What are the, not only what was the statute that came out, but what are the, the actual rules that the governmental agencies may have given for guidance. So again, as I said earlier, when I was the director of HR, I wish I had Insperity just for that clarity. So great points. Thanks, Marla. We have another question that's come in. What are some ways that we can improve our company culture?
That's a really great question. And I don't know how much time we have to answer that. Culture is a huge thing that has to be cultivated, and it takes a lot of time. I think the best place to start is talking to employees and understanding what their perspective is and what their expectations are in conjunction with what leadership's vision is. So it kind of has like two ways, from the top down and from the bottom up. And so what some kind of tools that we use often are questionnaires and surveys, so that we are asking questions to get answers from employees and from the whole organization, so that we're understanding what their thoughts are on certain things, like, do they believe that their leaders have clear communication? Do they believe that expectations for their roles are clear? Some basic foundational things like we talked about today, those things, are they happening? And if not, what kinds of projects can be worked on easily so that employees can see that movement right away and build that trust with employees? And that trust can help to move that needle very quickly to build the culture. Some other ideas that have worked really well with some of our clients are to have an internal culture team made up of employees, so that they're putting together ideas as to what they'd like to see. There has to be a little bit of, I'd have to say, be a little careful with that, because how much leeway are you going to give them as to what they can do, and some guidance as to what they can and can't do, right? They can't have free range totally, but at the same time, there's a lot of buy-in then as to some ideas that internal employees are coming up with as to what they want to do. So there's a lot of different things that can happen with changing a culture, but at the same time, I just want to say, when culture shifts happen and change happens, it takes some time. So it's not something that happens overnight, but there's definitely things that can be easier and be done, and can definitely change the mind shift of employees to see that leadership is really taking this seriously. So those are just a couple of things and recommendations that my team's worked on and that I've seen throughout the year.
Absolutely. And, one of the best things I've seen in, over 20 years in manufacturing and over 30 years total in business that I've had is that you can talk about what culture is on a poster or a t-shirt, but the real determinant of culture is, what do people do? What are those actions in leadership? What are those actions and responses when time gets hard, things get hard? So love your points, and love your point about asking people, surveying your population, what's important, and not trying to solve for something that's not a problem. So great points, Marla. Moving on now with our, we need to be sensitive to our time and respectful of your time, our audience. You jumped in and gave us some great feedback. The poll question that said, what compliance area poses the biggest challenge for your team? Payroll was a solid 50%. Your point about complexities, Marla, different states, leaves tracking, that kind of thing. Overtime was 25%. And safety was 25%. Your comments around that, Marla?
Absolutely. These specific areas are definitely challenging. And that's why I love being at Insperity. Like I mentioned, I've been here a little over 11 years, and we have subject matter experts who know all of these things. And I'm so glad, because I remember when I was in HR and I had to phone a friend, right, to ask questions about these things because I wasn't sure. And so having a safety consultant, having a team that knows about all of the overtime laws and legislation and about specific, whether you're exempt, non-exempt, those types of things. And then having payroll teams that service clients who have employees in all 50 states and those things. It's so helpful. So I'm spoiled, when I speak with colleagues who, with when I network and things, and with people who are not in Insperity, and with my friends who I used to work with, I'm spoiled because I just have to pick up the phone or send out an email and I can get that information. And so that's why our clients are so lucky, is that they work with us to have that information at just a call away. And it's important to stay on top of this. And like I said, if it's not us, make sure that you do have a valid resource to be able to make sure that what the compliance is for these areas and that you're staying on top of it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Marla. Moving on to our next poll question. How often do you update your employee handbook? 40% of you said annually, so great job. Every 2 to 3 years, 20%. Nobody's doing it when regulations change, because I think regulations are always changing. And then unsure, never updated, 20%, and don't have one, 20%. So again, thank you for your candor. It is really important to just kind of to figure out where we want to go, to see where we're at now. And so again, great opportunity is for all the reasons that Marla so eloquently stated throughout the podcast to update that. Any comments around that, Marla?
I just think that if you're updating it, that's great. If you don't have one, that's okay. You can start one easily and put it together and just make sure that you are looking at the policies that are important and setting expectations clearly. So I think just admitting that you need one and that you need to put one together, you got to start from somewhere. So I think it's a good time to take a look at what needs to go in it, and starting fresh is a good thing. And for those of you who have one, good job. It's great to have one. And those that are updating it, that's awesome. Again, just having that valid resource, I think, is so important.
Awesome here, and I'm having some fun with the slides here. So thank you for your answers around that. So as we wrap up today, here are a few next steps to keep the momentum going. Spread the word to your team and to other professionals who could benefit from these tips. Again, we had, just a small amount of time together, and there's so much information to cover, but certainly this webinar is available on demand. So you can refer back to it, you can replay it, you can share it. We encourage you to do all of those things. We also encourage you to connect with Carolina Reed, if you have questions. You can reach her at carolina.reed@insperity.com. Her phone number is 281-312-7423. She's happy to spend some time. I mentioned our mission earlier, to help businesses succeed so communities prosper. It's a great way to just find out more about how we could help, or what some areas that you might want to look at, whether or not you decide to move forward. Also, please read more about how Insperity services provide ongoing support for manufacturers of all sizes. Sometimes I hear people say, I'm too small, and I say, no, you're not. And sometimes people say, I'm too big, and the answer is no, you're not. We work with people from a few people to literally thousands, and happy to do all of those things with that. Also, really excited to invite all of you to our next webinar on compliance. That will be February 18th. And so really want you to encourage, how do you stay ahead of regulations and avoid costly pitfalls? That'll be February 18th at 11 a.m. Central Daylight Time with that. In summary, I would really just like to wrap up and say that we understand that there is so much administration for small to mid-sized manufacturing companies, and that Insperity can help with that burden. Marla and I sincerely hope that your time today has been well spent with us, and that it's been valuable for you. We appreciated your involvement, your engagement, and wish you well as you continue to move forward in the very noble industry of manufacturing.